Imagine the despair of an elderly mother, unable to defend herself, being brutally attacked by someone who was supposed to protect her. Mary Williams, an 80-year-old woman, seeks a moment of peace in a park, but ends up becoming a victim of police brutality. Her son, John, helplessly witnesses the abuse and decides to fight for justice. In this shocking and moving story, you'll see just how far power can corrupt and how resilience and community support can turn the tide. Watch until the end to discover how this battle for justice unfolds. And remember, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so that more people can hear this story of struggle and overcoming. Mary Williams gazed at the clear sky through the tree branches as she moved forward in her wheelchair through the park. The light breeze brushed her face, bringing a slight relief from the agitation she felt. It was rare for her to leave the house, but the community event made her want to feel the fresh air, hear the laughter of children, and maybe, just maybe, feel like part of something again. "Are you okay, Mom?" asked John, walking beside her. His eyes were attentive, worried about Mary's frailty. Mary smiled, the subtle smile of someone hiding deep sadness, and responded, "I'm okay, dear. It's good to see so much life here." The sound of children playing in the nearby playground echoed, and Mary leaned forward slightly to try to get a better view. Her eyes were tired, and her soul even more so. Feeling disconnected from the world was something she had learned to cope with. But at that moment, she longed for a small connection, even if it was just observing from a distance. John noticed her subtle movement and encouraged her, "If you want to get closer, we can go over there." She hesitated, but her desire to get closer made her nod in agreement. They moved forward slowly, passing smiling families, running children, and groups of friends chatting. The scene was vibrant, but Mary felt like a distant observer, as if she were a visitor in a world she no longer belonged to. As they approached the entrance to the playground, something in the atmosphere shifted. The light and joyful mood was interrupted by the presence of an imposing figure. Officer Jake Thompson, a tall and burly man with a stern expression, approached them with firm, quick steps. His eyes glared at Mary with disdain. "Hey, what are you doing here?" His voice sounded harsh, slicing through the air like a blade. John stopped, confused. "We're just taking a walk, sir." Thompson ignored John and continued glaring at Mary, as if she were an intruder. "This place isn't for you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You don't belong here." Mary, her voice frail, tried to respond, but the words faltered in her throat. "I just wanted to see the children." "I didn't ask," Thompson interrupted, now adopting a threatening posture. He took a step forward, completely blocking the way. "You're not going through here. Go back the way you came." John felt his blood boil, but his voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, my mother just wants to pass. There's no need to be rude. I make the rules here, got it?" The officer growled, stepping even closer. His eyes were cold, and the tension in the air was palpable. The park, which once felt welcoming, now became a scene of threat and embarrassment. By now, the people around them were beginning to notice what was happening. Whispers echoed among the onlookers, and some hands discreetly raised their cell phones. Mary lowered her head, feeling a wave of humiliation flood her already weary body. "Please." Her voice barely a whisper, but Thompson was determined to assert his authority. Without warning, he raised his hand and violently shoved the arm of the wheelchair, causing Mary to tilt sharply to the side. The pain was immediate, not only physical, but also emotional. John stood frozen for a second, unable to process what had just happened. "Hey, what are you doing?" he shouted, rushing to his mother's side, trying to keep her safe and steady. Indignation and anger boiled in his veins, but he knew he was facing a man with power and a weapon. Thompson looked at John with a sneer. "I told her to leave. You do well to listen too." The crowd around them moved closer, forming an invisible circle around the scene. A man, holding his phone, recorded everything, his horrified expression reflecting the feelings of many around him. Time seemed to slow down, and the tension was almost tangible. Mary, still recovering from the shock, looked up at her son, her eyes filled with fear and shame. She opened her mouth to say something, but the pain silenced her. John, breathing heavily, turned to the officer. "You can't do this. She did nothing wrong." Thompson crossed his arms, looking disdainfully at John. "Oh yeah? And who's going to stop me?" Before we continue with this powerful story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That's how you can contribute and help us keep bringing you meaningful stories about justice and overcoming challenges. Click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Let's continue. John, still holding onto the armrest of his mother's wheelchair, felt the anger burning in his chest, but something held him back. Thompson's fixed gaze, full of contempt, seemed to challenge him to do something, anything, that would give the officer a reason to escalate. The scene was so absurd that John could hardly believe what was happening. "Mom, are you okay?" John asked, his voice low and full of concern. His trembling fingers tightened around her arm, trying to offer some comfort. Mary couldn't respond right away. Her lips trembled, and a thin layer of sweat formed on her forehead. The pain in her shoulder radiated through her body, but what truly paralyzed her was the humiliation. She wasn't just physically hurt, her spirit was being crushed. A sense of fragility overtook her, as if life had been stripped away, leaving only the shell of a woman who had faced so many battles. John looked around. He felt the weight of the stares from people watching, some with horrified expressions, others with raised phones, recording every second. He knew something was very wrong, and his helplessness in the face of a man who should have been a figure of authority made it all the worse. Thompson broke the silence with an exasperated sigh, as if the drama he had created was merely a minor inconvenience. "I told her to leave. Are you going or not?" "She can't go anywhere, not by herself," John replied, his voice shaky but firm. "You're hurting my mother. She did nothing wrong." Thompson laughed, a dry, cruel sound that made the hairs on the back of John's neck stand up. "This is a playground, not a nursing home. She's in the way. I'm just doing my job." Mary raised her eyes, still dazed, and murmured, almost inaudibly, "I just wanted to see the children. I didn't know it was wrong." "Wrong," Thompson repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You know what's wrong? People like you thinking you can just wander around and ignore the rules. This park is for active people, not for people like you." The words cut into Mary's soul like knives. John couldn't take it any longer. "Enough," he shouted, his eyes locked on the officer, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. "You're abusing your power. This is absurd." Thompson stepped toward John, his heavy boots crushing the soft grass beneath them. He was close now, so close that John could smell the strong scent of cigarettes the officer had probably smoked before patrolling. The officer looked down at him, a shadow of threat in his eyes. "Listen here," Thompson said, his voice now low, but full of danger. "You're starting to piss off the wrong guy. I'm the law here, kid. If I say she has to leave, she leaves." John felt his heart pounding in his ears, but he kept his gaze steady. Fear, mixed with indignation, bubbled up inside him, a constant battle between the prudence of not confronting a man with a weapon and the desperate need to protect his mother. He took a step forward, now face to face with Thompson. "And what if I say we're not going anywhere?" For a moment, the park seemed to fall silent. The laughter of children and the distant conversations vanished, leaving only the sharp sound of the wind rustling the leaves. Thompson, his teeth clenched, took another step toward John, and then something unexpected happened. From across the crowd, a female voice broke the silence. "Leave them alone." A tall woman, holding up her phone, stepped forward, her voice trembling with indignation. "You can't treat them like this. I recorded everything." Her presence shattered the tension like breaking glass. The people around them began murmuring louder, their eyes full of disapproval directed at Thompson. More phones were raised, capturing every detail of the scene. John felt a thread of hope emerge, though he was still aware of the danger. "And who are you?" Thompson turned to the woman, his glare piercing. "This isn't your business." She didn't back down. "I'm a citizen, and what you're doing is wrong. This is an abuse of power." John used the moment to check on his mother. She was breathing heavily, her eyes still closed, her hand gripping tightly onto his sleeve. "Mom, hold on. We're going to get through this. I promise." The woman stood firm, now with a small crowd of support around her. "I've already posted it on social media. Everyone's going to know what you did. You're going to be famous for being a bully." Thompson, his face reddening with anger, looked ready to explode, but he knew he was losing control of the situation. He glanced around, his eyes sparking with frustration as the wave of support around Mary and John grew. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat, and all he could manage was a frustrated grunt. John, now seeing the moment of resistance had passed, knelt down beside his mother. "Let's get out of here, Mom. I'll take care of you." Mary opened her eyes, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "You didn't cause anything, Mom," John replied softly, his voice a whisper as he squeezed her hand. "We'll sort this out. I swear we will." Thompson still lingered nearby, his expression now a mix of rage and impotence, as more and more people gathered around, murmuring and recording everything. He cast one last look at Mary, then at John, before walking away, defeated by the growing pressure from the crowd. The air around them felt heavy, filled with tension and murmurs growing louder as more people gathered. John helped his mother straighten herself in the wheelchair, his fingers still trembling as his mind raced. He knew this wouldn't end here. The furious look in Thompson's eyes as he retreated was a clear sign that the officer wouldn't let this go without retaliation. Mary looked at her son, her face pale and exhausted. "John, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this." "It wasn't your fault, Mom," John replied, his voice heavy with guilt and pain. "You didn't do anything wrong. He's the one who's wrong here." As he spoke, John could feel the weight of the crowd's expectations surrounding them. People whispered, some murmuring words of support, while others stared intently at the officer as he walked away, still being recorded by several phones. A young woman, one of the first to intervene, approached John with a determined look. "Are you okay? Is your mom okay?" That was completely unacceptable. Someone needs to do something about this. John took a deep breath, glancing at his mother, who remained silent, her breathing still uneven. "She's shaken up, but she'll be okay, I think." The woman gripped her phone tightly. "I've already posted the video. It's going viral. In a few minutes, this will be everywhere. That cop isn't going to get away with this." John nodded, but part of him still felt vulnerable. I don't know what to do now. I've never been through anything like this before." An older man approached, his expression grave but supportive. "What that officer did was an abuse of power. He can't get away with it. You need to file a complaint." John looked at the man, feeling the weight of his words. "File a complaint? I don't even know where to start." "We'll help," the man responded, now placing a firm hand on John's shoulder. "We all saw it. All of us. The community is with you. We won't let this slide." Mary, still catching her breath, looked around, her voice weak but steady. I just wanted peace. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I just wanted to feel a little normal." The pain in her words made John clench his fists, the anger boiling inside him once again. How had her simple wish for normalcy turned into a nightmare? He looked over at Officer Thompson, now standing at a safe distance, discussing something with another officer who had arrived. A knot of fear tightened in John's stomach. "Do you think he's going to try something else?" John asked in a whisper to the man beside him. The man sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Guys like that don't like to lose. He might try to intimidate you, but that's why the community needs to come together now. We can't let him act in the shadows." Before John could respond, another figure stepped into the scene. A middle-aged woman dressed in simple clothes, but carrying an imposing posture. She approached quickly, her eyes burning with indignation. "That cop is known for abusing his power. This has happened before. He terrorizes the community, especially the most vulnerable," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to take this to higher authorities, to the media." "You're not alone." John felt a wave of relief and fear at the same time. The support was there, but that also meant he would have to dive into something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The pressure to protect his mother and fight against the injustice was starting to weigh on him. "I just want my mom to be safe," he said, his voice choking with emotion. "I don't want her to go through anything else." The woman nodded, understanding his concern. "She needs to rest, but we can't let this go. You have to act quickly. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to hold him accountable." John looked at Mary again, seeing the weariness in her eyes. She had been through so much. How could he drag her through an even bigger fight? But he knew there was no other choice. "All right," he said finally. "What do I need to do?" The woman looked at him with determination. "The first step is to make sure this video reaches the right channels. It's already on social media, but we need journalists, lawyers. This needs to get visibility." John took a deep breath. The idea of exposing his mother to the public and the media was terrifying, but he knew it was the only way to ensure justice. "Okay," he said, still hesitant. "Let's do it." As the conversation continued, Mary shifted in her chair, her body still fragile and sore. John immediately knelt beside her, holding her hand. "Does it hurt a lot, Mom?" She shook her head slightly, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not just my body, John. It's my heart. I feel so broken." John squeezed her hand tightly, trying to offer all the comfort he could. "We'll get through this, Mom. I promise." The sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance, breaking the moment of intimacy. More police officers were arriving at the park, and the crowd began to disperse, but the sense of outrage hung in the air. John stood up, feeling the pressure of the crowd's watchful eyes on him. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, looking around, trying to process everything. The woman who had first approached him responded, a confident glint in her eye. "Now your fight begins. And believe me, you're not alone." The sirens approached rapidly, and the sound echoed through the park like a signal of something much bigger to come. John stood by his mother, still holding her hand tightly. He could feel the cold sweat on his palms as his mind struggled to process everything happening around him. "Mom, stay calm. I'm here, okay?" John whispered, his voice filled with concern. Mary, visibly exhausted, only nodded silently. The red marks on her arm where Thompson had grabbed her were still fresh, and the expression of pain on her face was like a knife to John's heart. 2 more police cars pulled up at the edge of the park, and several officers got out. Thompson, still visibly angry, went over to his colleagues, gesturing brusquely and pointing toward John and Mary. John watched from a distance, his stomach churning. "He's trying to justify himself," said the young woman next to him, still holding her phone. "He knows he's in trouble." John glanced at her, a mix of gratitude and fear in his eyes. "I just want this to be over, but it feels like it's just beginning." One of the newly arrived officers, who seemed calmer and more professional, walked toward John and Mary, his firm steps crunching the gravel beneath his feet. He looked older, perhaps in his late 50s, and his face carried a serious expression, though without the hostility that Thompson had shown. "Good afternoon," the officer said, looking first at John then at Mary. "My name is Lieutenant Harris. We received a call about an incident. Can you tell me what happened here?" John took a deep breath, feeling the pressure of the moment. He knew that every word mattered, that this would be the first of many battles. "Officer Thompson, he attacked my mother for no reason. She was just trying to take a walk in the park. He shoved her. It was cruel, without any reason." Harris nodded, his eyes tired but attentive, shifting from John to Mary. "I understand. And you, ma'am, are you hurt?" Mary raised her gaze to the officer, her voice almost inaudible. "I'm fine. I just want to go home." "She's not fine," John interjected, his tone sharper than he intended. "Look at her arm. He hurt her. She's in shock." Harris remained calm, but his eyes narrowed, focusing on Thompson, who was watching from a distance. "I'll make sure this gets investigated," he said, in a tone that suggested he already knew the situation would be complicated. "But I need you both to come to the station to file a formal report. We have to do this by the book." John nodded, but there was a weight to his decision. He knew this was just the beginning of a long road ahead. As Harris stepped away to speak with Thompson, the crowd around them began to disperse slowly, though some remained, still recording everything. The air was thick with tension, almost palpable, as if everyone sensed that something bigger was about to unfold. Across the park, Thompson crossed his arms, staring directly at John, his face twisted in an expression of contempt. He knew he was being recorded, but he didn't seem intimidated. In fact, he looked even more arrogant, as if simply being in a position of authority granted him protection. "What's the matter, kid?" Thompson shouted in John's direction, drawing even more attention from those nearby. "You think you're going to take me down with a cell phone video? I am the law here." John felt his blood boil again, but he held himself back. He knew that reacting now was exactly what Thompson wanted, a reason to do something even worse. Instead, he clenched his fist, fighting to stay calm. "You've gotten yourself in enough trouble already," John said, his voice firm but controlled. "People saw what you did. Justice will prevail." Thompson laughed, a cruel sound filled with cynicism. "Justice? You have no idea how the world works, do you? People like you never get justice. I, on the other hand, have the power." John felt the officer's words like daggers, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Harris returned, interrupting the intense exchange of glares. "Thompson, that's enough," Harris said, in a calm but authoritative tone. "This isn't helping anyone. You've done enough." Thompson turned, his eyes still burning with anger, but he obeyed, taking a step back. Harris looked at John and Mary, trying to ease the situation. "I'll make sure you're heard," he said, with a look that tried to convey sincerity. "But understand, this is going to be a long process. I'll be honest with you, cases like this aren't easy." John didn't know what to say. He knew Harris was trying to help, but those words only confirmed what he feared. The fight ahead was going to be brutal. As the officers finished their discussions, a few people from the crowd approached John. "Don't give up," said the gray-haired man who had spoken earlier. "We're with you. We'll make sure this gets to the media." "They can't ignore it." John nodded, but the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. He looked at Mary, who was now nearly asleep in her wheelchair, exhausted and in pain. "I just want her to be okay," he murmured. "She will be," said the young woman, still holding her phone. "But only if you keep fighting." The words echoed in John's mind. He knew he couldn't stop, but the path ahead seemed almost insurmountable. And as he looked at the park, which now felt so far from the peace he and his mother had sought, the sense of injustice burned even deeper inside him. The next day, John woke up from a restless sleep. The night had been difficult, and the images of what had happened at the park were still etched in his mind. He looked at the clock beside his bed. 6:15 a.m. He knew he had a long day ahead. Mary was resting in her room, still visibly shaken by the previous day's events. John took a deep breath, feeling the growing pressure. He knew he needed help. He needed support, guidance, and maybe, just maybe, a miracle. As he descended the stairs, the sound of the doorbell interrupted his thoughts. He hurried to answer it, and to his surprise, a tall woman with her hair tied in a bun and a serious expression stood on the other side of the door. She was dressed in a smart suit, and next to her was the gray-haired man who had helped them at the park. "Mr. Williams?" Her voice was firm but polite. "Yes, that's me," John replied, still a little confused. "My name is Carla Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand. "I'm a civil rights attorney. This is Mr. Mario, whom you met yesterday. He contacted me after the incident at the park. I'm here to offer help." John blinked in surprise. "Help?" Mario stepped forward with a compassionate smile. "I told you that you wouldn't be alone in this. Carla is one of the best attorneys in the city when it comes to cases of abuse of power. She's here because she wants to help you and your mother get justice." John felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even if just for a brief moment. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Carla said, opening her briefcase and pulling out some papers. "But you do need to act quickly. We need a formal statement from you and your mother. Also, the video circulating on social media is gaining traction. This could be the key to the success of your case." John felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. He nodded slowly. "Of course. Let's do it. My mom is still resting, but I can give my statement now." Carla smiled slightly, pulling out a chair at the dining table. "Great. This will help us take the first step." John began recounting the events of the previous day in detail. With each word he spoke, he felt the tension ease a little more. Carla took meticulous notes, only interrupting to ask specific questions. "This is a good start," Carla said, closing her notebook. "With your statement and the video, we have a solid foundation. We'll request a formal investigation, and if the police department tries to cover this up, we can take the case to the national media." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. For a moment, it seemed like things were really starting to fall into place. Legal support, evidence, everything seemed to be in his favor. "Do you think we have a real chance?" Carla looked at him directly, her gaze steady. "We have a chance, yes. But I need to be honest with you, John. Cases like this can take time, and the system can be relentless. There will be challenges along the way, and you'll need to be strong." John nodded, trying to absorb everything. The idea of fighting for justice gave him strength, but he knew the road ahead would be long and painful. Still, he was willing to do whatever it took. "I'm ready," he said, with renewed determination. At that moment, Mary appeared in the doorway, visibly frail but determined to join the conversation. "What's going on?" John quickly stood up, going over to her. "Mom, this is Carla. She's a civil rights attorney. She's here to help us." Mary looked at Carla, her expression tired but relieved. I don't know if I can handle this." Carla stood and approached Mary, offering a gentle smile. "I know it's hard, but we're not asking you to do this alone. We'll fight together. You have the right to be heard and to get justice." Mary looked down, her voice weak. "I just wanted peace. I never thought this would turn into something so big." John held her hand. "Mom, you deserve justice. You can't let what he did go unanswered." Mary sighed, her eyes filled with weariness, but also a quiet acceptance. "If this is what needs to be done, then we'll do it." Carla nodded, gathering her papers and placing them back in her briefcase. "Great. We'll start the process right away. I'll get in touch with the police and begin filing the formal complaint. You'll be kept informed every step of the way." As Carla and Mario left, John closed the door behind them, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. For a moment, it seemed like things were moving in the right direction. But then, a loud knock echoed through the room. John froze for a second, then walked slowly to the door and opened it. Standing on the other side was Thompson, no longer in uniform, but with the same threatening expression as before. "You think this is over? I told you don't know how the game is played." John felt his blood run cold. The officer stared at him, a cold smile on his face. "This is just getting started." John stared at Thompson at the door, feeling the weight of his threatening presence. The air between them felt electrified, thick with the tension of something about to explode. Thompson crossed his arms, his cold, calculated smile, as if he had already won the battle before it even began. You really thought this was going to be easy? Thompson asked, his voice full of disdain. You think a lawyer is going to change anything? I've been in this game a long time, kid. John tried to stay calm, but fear and anger mixed in his chest, making his hands tremble. He glanced inside the house, where Mary sat in the living room, visibly tired but alert. He couldn't let Thompson intimidate her again. You've done enough, Thompson, John responded, his voice firmer than he felt inside. This is going to end. What you did was filmed. Everyone saw it. Thompson's smile widened, but there was no humor in it, only arrogance. Videos don't change anything, kid. What do you think is going to happen? The police are going to suspend me? They're going to side with me. They always do. John felt his stomach churn. He knew there was some truth in Thompson's words, but the idea of giving in to him was unbearable. Justice will prevail, he said, his voice quieter but determined. Thompson took a step forward, invading John's space, his face now closer, the threat clear in his eyes. Justice? I am justice here, and I'm going to make sure you and your mother know that. You think just because you have some videos and a lawyer I'm going to back down? This isn't going to end well for you. John felt fear tightening in his chest, but he refused to back down. He straightened up, trying to appear more confident than he really felt. You've already lost, Thompson. Now it's just a matter of time. Thompson laughed again, this time louder, almost forced, as if mocking John's determination. That's what you think, kid. But I'm going to teach you a lesson. Before John could react, Thompson suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the collar of his shirt and yanking him hard. John stumbled backward, trying to keep his balance, but fear shot down his spine. Mary, sitting on the couch, let out a sharp cry, her voice weak but desperate. Leave him alone. John felt the ground beneath his feet become unstable, and for a brief moment, he thought Thompson was actually going to hurt him right there, in front of his own mother. But then, something inside him ignited. He couldn't let this continue. Let go of me, John shouted, his voice finally coming out with force. He shoved Thompson back with all the strength he had, breaking free from his grip. Thompson stumbled a step back, surprised, but not intimidated. He glared at John, his eyes burning with suppressed rage. You're playing with fire, kid. I'm going to ruin you. The sound of screeching tires cut through the air, interrupting the confrontation. 2 police cars pulled up outside the house, and officers quickly exited, their expressions concerned as they saw Thompson and John in such a tense standoff. Thompson, one of the officers shouted, rushing over. What are you doing here? Thompson raised his hands as if innocent, stepping back a few paces. Nothing, just a friendly conversation, he replied with a fake smile. The approaching officer looked skeptical, but maintained his composure. He glanced at John, then back at Thompson. That's enough. Thompson, leave now. This isn't helping anyone. Thompson shot one last hateful look at John before finally stepping back. This isn't over, he muttered, with a menacing tone that sent a chill down John's spine. As Thompson walked away, the officer who had confronted him approached John. Are you okay? He asked, his voice now calmer but still full of concern. John nodded, still trying to catch his breath. Yeah, I just want this to end. The officer looked at him with empathy. This isn't going to be easy, but we're keeping an eye on things. Don't let Thompson intimidate you. If he tries anything else, call the station immediately. John nodded again, feeling exhausted. Thank you. The officer gave a brief nod and walked away, leaving John and Mary alone in the living room. John closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on him. Every muscle in his body felt tense, as if he was bracing for a fight that wasn't over yet. John! Mary's fragile voice called from the couch, bringing him back to reality. He went to her, kneeling by her side and taking her hand. I'm here, Mom. It's okay now, he said, though he knew those words weren't completely true. Mary looked at him, her eyes full of worry. I don't know if I can take much more of this. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. John squeezed her hand, his voice soft but determined. "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to let him hurt you anymore. We'll fight this together." Mary nodded slowly, though the fear was still present in her eyes. "I trust you, John." He smiled slightly, trying to offer some comfort. Everything's going to be okay. Days had passed, and John began to feel the weight of the battle he was fighting. The nights were short and restless, filled with nightmares about what Thompson might do next. He had received support from some members of the community and even from the attorney Carla, but the fear of greater retaliation from Thompson never left him. That morning, as John tried to prepare coffee for his mother, the doorbell rang. His heart raced. Every time that happened, the possibility of Thompson showing up sent chills down his spine. He hesitated before answering, but soon saw the familiar figure of Carla through the window in the door. "Carla," he said, quickly opening the door. "Good to see you. Any progress?" Carla stepped inside, carrying a worried expression. "John, I managed to push the authorities to formally investigate your mother's case. The video and the testimonies help a lot, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Thompson has a long list of supporters within the police force. They're trying to cover it up." John's heart sank a little, but he had expected something like this. "And what does that mean? That he's going to get away with it?" Carla shook her head, sitting down at the kitchen table. "Not yet, but we need to prepare for a long process. They're going to try to discredit you and your mother in every way possible." John ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This isn't fair. He attacked a defenseless elderly woman, and now they're going to try to make it seem like she's the one at fault. Carla looked at him with empathy. "Unfortunately, that's how these cases often work, John. But you're not alone. The community is rallying behind you. The video has spread. The media is starting to cover the case." John nodded, though the feeling of helplessness still lingered. "My mother doesn't deserve this. She just wanted a little peace." "I know," Carla said, placing a hand on John's shoulder. "But the fight for justice is always hard. We need to keep going." The sound of a door opening caught both of their attention, and Mary appeared in the hallway, her steps slow and uncertain. "John, what's happening?" "Mom, everything's fine. Carla just came to update us on the case," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Mary looked at both of them, her eyes weary. I don't know if I can keep going with this. It feels like each day gets harder." John walked over to her and gently hugged her. "Mom, I'm here with you. We're going to get through this. I promise." The moment of comfort was interrupted by another sound. The doorbell again. This time, John's heart really stopped for a second. He exchanged glances with Carla, and both of them knew what it might mean. John opened the door slowly, and there stood Thompson. He was no longer in uniform, but his face bore the same arrogance and disdain. "Good morning, kid," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just thought I'd stop by for a friendly visit." Carla quickly stood up, placing herself between John and Thompson. "Thompson, what are you doing here? You don't have the right to approach John's family while the case is ongoing." Thompson smiled, but his eyes were full of malice. "Oh, I'm just passing through. It's not illegal to visit old acquaintances, is it?" John felt the anger rise inside him. He knew Thompson was there to intimidate them, to remind them that he still had power, even without the uniform. "You're not welcome here," John said, trying to keep his composure. "Leave before I call the police." Thompson shrugged. "The police? You think they're going to do anything? I am the police, kid, and you're treading on dangerous ground." Carla interrupted, her voice firm and authoritative. "Thompson, I strongly recommend you leave. Any move you make will be documented and used against you in court." Thompson looked at her for a moment, as if assessing her strength. Then he turned back to John. "You might have lawyers, videos, and media support, but I know the system from the inside. In the end, the ones who are going to suffer are you and your mother." John stepped forward, the anger now clear in his voice. "You've already made us suffer, but I'm not going to let you destroy my mother. I won't allow it." For a brief moment, Thompson seemed surprised by John's firmness, but he quickly recovered, letting out a short, cruel laugh. "We'll see, kid. We'll see." He started to walk away slowly, but not before casting one last, threatening look at John. "This is far from over. And when it's done, you're going to wish you never started." John stood there, breathing heavily as he watched Thompson leave. Carla was watching him, her eyes cautious. "He's trying to break you, John," she said. "That's how he operates. But we can't let him win." John nodded, but the weight of the situation felt overwhelming. "I know, but every time he shows up, I feel like we're losing ground." Carla placed her hand on his shoulder again. "We're not. This is part of his strategy. But you're fighting for what's right. And that's what matters." Mary, who had watched everything from the doorway, slowly approached. "John, I'm so sorry you have to go through this." John turned to his mother, his voice soft. "It's not your fault, Mom. All of this is because of you. But I'd do it all again to protect you." She looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. "I know. And that's why we're going to win." John was exhausted. Each day felt like an endless battle, and Thompson's threats continued to loom over him and his mother like a shadow. But something had changed in the last 24 hours. The video of the incident, which had spread rapidly on social media, had finally reached the mainstream media. The entire country was watching. It was early morning when the news came. Carla was at John's house, discussing the next steps, when her phone rang. She answered quickly, and her expression changed instantly. "Yes, I understand. Yes, thank you for the information. We'll be there." John felt the tension in the air. "What happened, Carla?" Carla hung up the phone and looked directly at John. "It's official. Thompson has been temporarily suspended from duty." The video gained more traction than we expected. The national media picked up the story, and now there's immense pressure on the police department to conduct a fair investigation. John blinked, trying to process the words. "So, he's out? He's finally going to pay for what he did?" "Not exactly," Carla said cautiously. "He's been suspended, but that doesn't mean he'll be convicted. We still have a long way to go, but this is a huge step." Mary, who was sitting on the couch, had been silently watching everything. She lifted her head, her voice trembling but filled with hope. "Does this mean he can't hurt us anymore?" Carla nodded. "For now, yes. And if we keep pushing, he'll have no choice but to face the legal consequences." John walked over to his mother, holding her hand. "See, Mom? We're making progress. We're winning this fight." Mary's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed John's hand tightly. "I just want this to be over, John. I want us to live in peace again." John smiled softly, wiping her tears away with his thumb. "It will be over, Mom. I promise. And you'll never have to go through this again." The feeling of relief was beginning to seep into the house, but John knew this wasn't the end. He had learned not to fully trust anything until everything was resolved. Later that day, they went to the police station. Carla accompanied them, guiding every step. As they entered, the looks from the officers were different this time. There was no longer that awkward silence or the feeling that they were being judged. Public pressure had shifted the atmosphere, and now it seemed like the wheels of justice were finally turning in their favor. "We're here to file a formal complaint," Carla said firmly to the officer at the desk. "We want to ensure this case isn't swept under the rug." The officer nodded, looking nervous. "Of course, ma'am. We'll take care of it immediately." As they filled out the paperwork and gave their statements, John realized something he had never felt before: power. Not the power to control or intimidate, but the power of being on the right side. He was no longer just reacting to Thompson's attacks. He was taking control of the situation. After everything was filed, Carla led them outside. This was a big step. "Now we need to ensure the case continues to be closely monitored. The media is on our side, so they'll have to be transparent from now on." John nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of finally seeing results. "And Thompson? What's going to happen to him? Now that he's been suspended, he'll be formally investigated. If we can prove the abuse of power, he could be fired and even face criminal charges, Carla explained. But it won't be easy. We need to stay vigilant. As they spoke, a group of reporters approached, cameras and microphones ready. John, can you tell us how you're feeling now that Thompson has been suspended? John took a deep breath. I feel relieved, but it's not over yet. My mother has suffered so much because of this man, and all we want is justice. Not just for her, but for everyone who has gone through something similar. The reporters scribbled down his words, and the cameras captured every expression. What about the support from the community? One reporter asked. How has that helped in the process? John glanced to the side, where several people from the community were gathered, some holding signs of support. Without them, we wouldn't be here. The community support has made all the difference. They gave us the strength to keep fighting. The interviews wrapped up, and John and Mary headed home with Carla, feeling a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Thompson had been suspended, and the case was gaining the attention it deserved. But John knew there was still much to be done. Later that day, as the sun began to set, John and Mary sat on the couch, side by side. Do you think he'll pay for what he did? Mary asked, her voice soft. John looked out at the horizon, the golden light bathing the room. Yes, Mom, he will. And when that happens, you'll finally have the peace you deserve. Mary smiled slightly, closing her eyes. I just wanted to live peacefully without fear. You will, John promised. I'll make sure of it. The story of John and Mary reminds us that the fight for justice is never easy, but it is essential. Thompson, the police officer who abused his authority, believed he was above the law, but thanks to the community's support and John's courage, the truth came to light. Justice is not just a legal matter, it's a moral one. When we fight for what's right, when we come together to combat oppression, we create a better world. This story is about courage, resilience, and the importance of not staying silent in the face of injustice. We all have the power to make a difference, whether by supporting those in need or fighting our own battles. And you? What are you doing to make the world a more just place? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep fighting for a fairer world together.